May 5, 1945. The war in Europe is dying, but not yet dead. In the Austrian Alps, an impossible alliance is about to form. American soldiers, Wehrmacht officers, Austrian resistance fighters, and French VIP prisoners will stand together against the SS in one of the strangest battles in military history. This is Castle Itter, a medieval fortress that became the stage for the only known battle where Americans and Germans fought side by side against a common enemy. What happened here defies everything we think we know about World War II. By early May 1945, Nazi Germany was collapsing. Hitler had committed suicide on April 30th. Soviet forces were conquering Berlin street by street. The Western Allies were racing across southern Germany and Austria. The once mighty Wehrmacht was disintegrating. Some units surrendered, others fled, while fanatical SS formations fought on. In this chaos, thousands of prisoners held in concentration camps and special prisons faced uncertain fates. Some guards abandoned their posts, others executed prisoners to hide evidence of war crimes. In the Austrian mountains, one peculiar prison held some of France's most prominent figures, and their survival hung in the balance. Castle Itter sits on a hilltop in Tyrol, Austria, near the town of Vogel. Built in the 13th century, this medieval fortress features thick stone walls, towers, and commanding views of the surrounding valleys. Its remote location made it ideal for the Nazis' purposes: isolated, defensible, and far from prying eyes. The castle is accessible by a single winding mountain road, making escape difficult, but also creating a natural bottleneck for attackers. The surrounding terrain is steep alpine forest, beautiful but treacherous. In May 1945, this picturesque castle would become a battlefield where former enemies united against the fanaticism of the dying Reich. Castle Itter wasn't a typical concentration camp. It was a prison for Ehrenhaftlinge, or honor prisoners. The inmates were former French prime ministers, generals, and prominent figures whom the Nazis considered too valuable to kill but too dangerous to free. Among them, Edouard Daladier, who had been prime minister during France's defeat in 1940, Paul Reynaud, another former prime minister, General Maxime Weygand, former supreme commander of French forces, and Maurice Gamelin, who had commanded French armies at the war's outbreak. Also present were tennis star Jean Borotra, trade unionist Léon Jouhaux, and former Vichy official François de la Roque. These men represented France's political and military establishment, imprisoned together despite their vastly different politics. Life at Castle Itter was harsh but not as brutal as concentration camps. The prisoners received adequate food, could exercise in the courtyard, and even maintained a small library. However, they lived under constant guard by SS troops, isolated from news of the outside world. The French VIPs, despite their political differences, ranging from right-wing to left-wing, military to civilian, learned to coexist in close quarters. Some played cards, others discussed philosophy and politics. As the war's end approached, tension mounted. Would the SS execute them to prevent liberation? Would the castle become a final battleground? The prisoners had no weapons, no means of escape, and no idea what fate awaited them. On May 4th, 1945, as news of Hitler's death spread and the war's end became inevitable, the SS guards at Castle Itter made a decision. Rather than face justice or a last stand, they simply left. The commander, Obersturmbannführer Eduard Weiter, abandoned his post along with most of his men. The prisoners suddenly found themselves free but terribly vulnerable. They were in the middle of the Austrian Alps, with no transportation, no weapons, and no clear idea of where Allied forces were. Even more dangerous roaming bands of die-hard SS units were executing anyone they considered traitors or defeatists. The prisoners faced a dilemma: stay in the castle and risk an SS attack, or flee into the mountains and risk capture or worse. One man would change everything. Andreas Krobot, a Czech cook who worked at the castle, was secretly part of the Austrian resistance. When the SS fled, Krobot saw an opportunity. He volunteered to bike down the mountain to find help. It was an incredibly dangerous mission. He would have to travel through territory where SS units might execute him on sight. Krobot pedaled through the night of May 4th, riding toward the town of Innsbruck, hoping to find American forces. His journey covered treacherous mountain roads in darkness, with the constant threat of SS patrols. This act of courage by an ordinary kitchen worker set in motion the extraordinary events that would follow. Captain Jack Lee Jr. of the U.S. Army's 23rd Tank Battalion, 12th Armored Division, was a young officer leading a small task force in the closing days of the war. On May 4th, his unit was in the town of Kufstein, Austria, mopping up remaining German resistance. Lee was typical of American officers in those final days, eager to end the war, wary of unnecessary casualties, and dealing with the chaos of a collapsing enemy. When Andreas Krobot found American forces and reported the French VIPs trapped at Castle Itter, the message eventually reached Lee. He faced a decision: launch a risky rescue mission into uncertain territory or let someone else handle it. Lee chose action. Major Josef Gangl represented a different side of Germany, the professional soldier who had grown disillusioned with Nazism. An officer in the Wehrmacht, Gangl had fought on multiple fronts, but increasingly questioned the regime he served. As the war ended, he joined the Austrian resistance, helping to organize opposition against die-hard SS units. On May 4th, Gangl learned about the French prisoners at Castle Itter and their danger. He had local knowledge, understanding the terrain and the threat posed by SS remnants in the area. When Captain Lee's rescue mission began organizing, Gangl made an extraordinary decision. He would fight alongside the Americans to protect the prisoners, even if it meant battling his own countrymen. On May 5th, Captain Lee assembled his rescue force. One M4 Sherman tank, nicknamed Besotten Jenny, a handful of American soldiers, and a truck. When Major Gangl approached with a group of Wehrmacht soldiers willing to help defend the castle, the situation became surreal. American and German soldiers who had been killing each other for years now prepared to fight together. Lee, pragmatic and focused on the mission, accepted Gangl's offer. The Germans knew the area, spoke the language, and understood SS tactics. The Americans brought firepower and legitimacy. They shook hands, shared cigarettes, and began planning the castle's defense. It was a scene unimaginable just days earlier. The combined American-German force began the journey to Castle Itter on the morning of May 5th. The Sherman tank led, followed by trucks carrying soldiers. The mountain road was narrow and treacherous, winding through alpine valleys. Lee's group remained alert. SS units could be anywhere. As they climbed higher, the terrain became more challenging. The Sherman struggled on the steep grades, its tracks grinding against stone. When they finally reached Castle Itter around noon, the French prisoners watched in disbelief as American and German soldiers arrived together. The prisoners couldn't comprehend what they were seeing, enemies cooperating to save them. There was no time for lengthy explanations. Lee immediately began organizing the castle's defense. Castle Itter's medieval design provided both advantages and disadvantages. The thick stone walls offered protection against small arms fire, but had numerous windows and openings. The single road access was a defensive bottleneck, but also the only escape route. Lee positioned the Sherman tank to cover the main approach. Wehrmacht soldiers, familiar with defensive tactics, helped position riflemen at strategic windows. The Americans distributed ammunition and established fields of fire. The French prisoners, though untrained for combat, volunteered to help. Tennis champion Jean Barotra proved particularly enthusiastic, insisting on taking an active role. The defenders numbered fewer than 20 combat-capable men facing an unknown enemy force. Inside the castle, the French VIPs processed their bizarre situation. Men who had led France into war, who had argued politics for decades, now faced battle together. Former generals Weygand and Gamelin, despite being in their 70s, prepared to fight. Jean Barotra, the tennis star, volunteered for the most dangerous task. He would attempt to escape through SS lines to bring reinforcements. The prisoners gathered weapons dropped by fleeing SS guards, a few rifles, some pistols and hand grenades. Paul Reynaud, the former Prime Minister, took up a rifle despite having no combat training. These men, who had spent years in captivity, now had a chance to fight for their freedom. The irony wasn't lost on them, saved by Germans and Americans working together. Around 4 a.m. on May 5th, lookouts spotted movement on the road. An SS unit was approaching, approximately 150 soldiers from the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division. These weren't regular Wehrmacht. These were ideological fanatics who would rather die than accept defeat. They had learned of the traitor Wehrmacht soldiers defending the castle alongside Americans and were determined to execute everyone involved. The SS had numbers but lacked heavy weapons, no tanks or artillery. However, they had Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons and machine guns. As dawn broke over the Alps, the SS took positions in the forest surrounding the castle. The defenders inside watched as their enemies maneuvered, knowing the attack would come soon. The SS opened fire at approximately 4:30 a.m. Machine gun rounds raked the castle walls, smashing windows and sending stone chips flying. The defenders returned fire, the sharp crack of rifles echoing through the mountain valley. The Sherman tank, Besotten Jenny, fired its 75 mm cannon at SS positions, each shot thunderous in the confined valley. The Germans defending the castle found themselves shooting at their own countrymen, an emotionally wrenching but necessary act. Captain Lee coordinated the defense, moving between positions and encouraging his mixed force. The SS attempted to advance up the road, but were driven back by concentrated fire. The battle settled into a deadly exchange, both sides seeking advantage. During the height of the battle, Jean Barotra executed his daring plan. The 46-year-old tennis champion, nicknamed the Bounding Basque for his athletic style, volunteered to escape over the castle walls and run for help. Using his athletic skills, Barotra climbed down the castle's rear wall, dropped into the forest, and sprinted through SS lines. He dodged between trees as bullets whistled past, using terrain to mask his movement. His athletic conditioning, maintained even during imprisonment, served him well. Barotra ran several kilometers through the mountains until he reached American lines, gasping out his message: Castle Itter needed reinforcements immediately. American officers initially doubted his story. It seemed too incredible. But Barotra's desperation convinced them. Relief forces began mobilizing, but would they arrive in time? The SS concentrated their Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons on Besotten Jenny. Around mid-morning, an SS soldier maneuvered close enough to fire. The Panzerfaust rocket struck the Sherman's side armor, penetrating through in a shower of sparks and flame. The tank's crew bailed out seconds before ammunition inside began cooking off. Explosions rocked the vehicle as shells detonated. The defenders' most powerful weapon was now a burning hulk. Without the tank, the balance of power shifted dramatically. The SS, seeing their success, pressed their attack with renewed vigor. Lee repositioned his men to cover the gap left by the tank's loss. The situation became desperate. Ammunition was running low, defenders were exhausted, and the SS showed no signs of retreating. Major Joseph Gangl moved between defensive positions, directing fire and encouraging the defenders. Around 2 p.m. he spotted an SS soldier attempting to flank the main gate. Gangl moved to a window to get a clear shot, exposing himself briefly. An SS sniper, watching for such opportunities, fired a single round. The bullet struck Gangl in the head, killing him instantly. He died defending French prisoners alongside American soldiers against the regime he had once served. His death shocked both the German and American defenders. Gangl had become a respected leader during the brief battle. The former French generals insisted his sacrifice would be remembered. For the defenders, Gangl's death made the battle personal. They were no longer just protecting prisoners, they were honoring a fallen comrade. With Gangl dead and the Sherman destroyed, the defenders' situation became critical. Ammunition dwindled to a few rounds per man. The SS, sensing victory, intensified their assault. They advanced to within 50 meters of the castle walls, firing into windows and throwing grenades. Former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud fought from a window despite being over 60. General Weygand, in his 70s, helped pass ammunition. The American soldiers, down to their last magazines, made every shot count. The Wehrmacht defenders, fighting against their former comrades, showed no hesitation. Inside the castle, everyone knew that if the SS breached the walls, no prisoners would be taken. This was a fight to the death. At approximately 4 p.m., the sound of engines echoed through the valley. A relief column from the 12th Armored Division, alerted by Jean Barotra, arrived with multiple Sherman tanks and infantry. The SS, seeing overwhelming force approaching, began retreating into the forest. Some SS soldiers were cut down as they fled. Others escaped into the mountains. The defenders in Castle Itter, hearing the approaching American vehicles, cheered with relief and exhaustion. The 14-hour battle was over. The French prisoners had survived, saved by an impossible alliance. As American reinforcements secured the area, the defenders collapsed from exhaustion. They had held against terrible odds. The relief force commander, seeing Americans and Germans fighting together, could barely believe what he witnessed. In the hours after the battle, medics treated wounded defenders while engineers cleared the destroyed Sherman. The French prisoners, now truly liberated, couldn't adequately express their gratitude. They shook hands with every defender, American and German alike. The Wehrmacht soldiers who had fought alongside the Americans faced an uncertain future. Would they be treated as prisoners of war or as allies? Captain Lee vouched for them, explaining their crucial role in the defense. The surviving German defenders were processed but treated with respect for their actions. Major Gangl's body was prepared for burial with full military honors. The castle, scarred by bullets and explosions, had witnessed something unprecedented in military history. The liberated French prisoners were transported to American headquarters, then gradually repatriated to France. Edouard Daladier, Paul Reynaud, and the others returned to a country transformed by war and occupation. Some resumed political careers, others retired from public life. They carried with them the memory of Castle Itter, the day enemies became allies. General Weygand, despite his age, lived many more years, always speaking highly of the Americans and Germans who saved him. Jean Barotra returned to tennis and became a symbol of French resistance and survival. these men who had led France into war and through defeat now witnessed the strange circumstances of their rescue. Their testimonies about Castle Itter seemed so incredible that some initially doubted their stories. Captain John C. Sauce, Jack Lee Jr., was recommended for the Medal of Honor for his leadership at Castle Itter. However, the award was downgraded to the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration. The official reason remains unclear, though some speculate that the involvement of German soldiers complicated the narrative. Lee continued serving in the army after the war, eventually retiring as a major. He rarely spoke publicly about Castle Itter, viewing it as simply doing his duty. In later years, historians sought him out to document the battle, and Lee provided detailed accounts. He always emphasized the courage of Major Gangl and the Wehrmacht soldiers who fought alongside him, insisting they deserved equal recognition for their role in the impossible victory. Major Joseph Sepp Gangl became a hero in Austria. The town of Vogel named a street after him, honoring his resistance against the Nazis and his sacrifice at Castle Itter. His grave became a memorial site. Gangl represented the complicated nature of wartime Germany, soldiers who served their country but opposed the Nazi ideology. His decision to fight alongside Americans and protect French prisoners demonstrated moral courage beyond the physical bravery he showed in battle. Austrian historians view Gangl as an example of resistance from within the Wehrmacht, proof that not all German soldiers embraced Nazi fanaticism. His widow received his personal effects and letters of condolence from both American officers and the French prisoners he died protecting. The Wehrmacht soldiers who fought at Castle Itter were processed as prisoners of war, but received favorable treatment due to their actions. Most were released relatively quickly as the Allied occupation of Germany began. They returned to civilian life in a devastated Germany, carrying the unusual distinction of having fought alongside Americans. Some maintained correspondence with the French prisoners they had protected. Their families were told of their honorable conduct in the war's final days. These men represented the thousands of German soldiers who, in the war's closing moments, made choices based on humanity rather than ideology. Their participation at Castle Itter showed that even in total war, individuals could transcend national hatred and choose cooperation over conflict. Thus, the Battle of Castle Itter matters because it challenges our simplified narratives of World War II. We prefer clear stories of good versus evil, allies versus enemies. Castle Itter shows that reality was more complex. Wehrmacht soldiers weren't all Nazi fanatics. Some were professionals trapped by circumstance. The SS weren't representative of all Germans. They were extremists even their countrymen opposed. Americans and Germans could cooperate when circumstances demanded it. The battle demonstrates that individuals can make moral choices even within immoral systems. It proves that humanity can emerge even in war's darkest moments. Castle Itter reminds us that history is made by people making decisions, not by abstract forces. The battle was small, tactically insignificant, but symbolically profound. Castle Itter wasn't entirely unique. Other instances of unusual cooperation occurred as the war ended. In some areas, Wehrmacht units cooperated with Americans against SS formations. Soviet and German troops occasionally worked together against common threats. Local truces emerged when both sides recognized the war was over. However, Castle Itter stands out for its dramatic circumstances and the prominence of those involved. No other incident involved such a direct, sustained combat operation between former enemies. The battle occurred at a perfect historical moment, late enough that the outcome was certain, early enough that fighting continued. Had it happened days earlier, the cooperation might have been impossible days later, and the SS threat would have dissipated. Timing made Castle Itter possible. For decades, Castle Itter remained relatively obscure. The participants were scattered, records were incomplete, and the story seemed too strange to be true. Gradually, historians pieced together the full narrative. Books were written, documentaries produced, and the battle entered public consciousness. Stephen Harding's 2013 book, The Last Battle, brought renewed attention. The story resonates because it offers something rare, a genuinely uplifting tale from World War II's closing days. In an era dominated by accounts of Holocaust horrors and battlefield carnage, Castle Itter provides evidence of humanity's better nature. Modern audiences familiar with simplistic war narratives find the complexity appealing. The battle has been proposed for films multiple times, though none have been produced yet. Today, Castle Itter operates as a private residence and is not regularly open to the public. However, the exterior can be viewed, and the village of Itter maintains historical markers describing the battle. The town of Vogel has a small museum with exhibits about the battle and Major Gangel's role. The road where Besotten Jenny was destroyed remains narrow and winding, much as it was in 1945. Visitors can walk the area, imagining the desperate fight that occurred here. The castle itself shows no obvious scars from the battle. Stone walls were repaired, windows replaced. Only plaques and memorials indicate that this picturesque alpine castle witnessed one of World War II's strangest moments. For history enthusiasts, the site offers a tangible connection to an incredible story. The Battle of Castle Itter teaches us that enemies can become allies when confronted with greater evil. It shows that individuals can transcend their circumstances and make moral choices even in total war. Major Gangel chose honor over ideology. Captain Lee chose mission success over prejudice. The French prisoners chose to fight rather than passively await fate. The Wehrmacht soldiers chose humanity over hatred. These decisions made in desperate circumstances demonstrate human agency in history's darkest moments. Castle Itter reminds us that people are not merely products of their nations or times, they are individuals capable of surprising choices. In our current era of division and conflict, the battle offers hope. It proves that cooperation is possible even between bitter enemies, that common threats can unite those who seem irreconcilably opposed, and that courage takes many forms. The defenders of Castle Itter, American, German, French, and Austrian, showed that when facing fanaticism and evil, nationality matters less than character. Their impossible alliance, forged in battle and sealed in blood, remains one of World War II's most inspiring stories.